What would you do if you caught your closest friend giving oral pleasure to your one and only trusted husband? Have you ever loved someone so deeply, so completely, that you thought you would lose yourself in the process? Sophie had. She had given Yemen everything. Her heart, her trust, her future. But was it all worth it? Was he the man she thought he was, or had he been playing a dangerous game from the start? The moment Sophie stood in front of the mirror that evening, a wave of realization hit her like a freight train. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Was she still the woman who dreamed of love, freedom, and happiness? Or had she become a shadow, a puppet controlled by the man she thought would protect her? Her mind raced. How had she let it get this far? How had she allowed Yemen to manipulate her emotions, turning her into someone she barely recognized? And the worst part, did she even have the strength left to break free? Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. It was Lily. Lily had been Sophie's closest friend for years, her confidant, her rock. But lately, Sophie had pushed her away, afraid to reveal the truth. What would Lily think of her now? Could she even trust herself? The door opened, and there stood Lily, her face filled with concern. "Sophie," she said softly, "what's going on? You've been distant. I know something's wrong." Sophie's heart sank. How much longer could she hide the truth? Was it possible to escape the life she had built with Yemen, or was she already too deep? But it wasn't until that moment, when Lily took Sophie's hand and looked her in the eyes, that Sophie realized the terrifying truth. She was no longer in control. Yemen had won, and she was a mere pawn in his game. Or was she? Before we delve deeper into this web of intrigue, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want us to keep bringing you stories told and untold stories. Now let's crack this case wide open. Sophie's story was not unique, at least not in the traditional sense. Many women over the years have found themselves trapped in toxic relationships, caught between the comfort of familiarity and the crushing weight of manipulation. But Sophie's story was different. This wasn't just about a bad marriage. This was about the slow unraveling of a woman who'd once believed she was in control, only to find that control had long since slipped from her grasp. Sophie Summers, a woman of 38, had always been seen as the picture of success. Raised in a family where expectations were high, Sophie had excelled at everything she put her mind to. She had graduated from a prestigious university with honors, made a name for herself in the competitive world of finance, and had a social circle that envied her for the life she had built. Her marriage to Yemen was supposed to be the crown jewel of it all, the perfect love story, the ideal partnership. But Sophie wasn't just any woman. Beneath her poised exterior, she was someone who craved genuine connection, someone who had an immense capacity for love and empathy. She had always been the kind of person who gave her all to those she cared about. It was this very nature that made her an easy target for someone like Yemen. Yemen Khalid, her husband, was a man who had perfected the art of charm. On the surface, he was everything a woman could dream of. Handsome, successful, and incredibly persuasive. He had a way of making people feel seen, understood, and adored. To the outside world, he was a businessman with a brilliant future ahead of him, a man with an ever-growing empire in the technology sector. But behind the closed doors of their home, Yemen was a master manipulator, weaving a complex web of emotional control. When Sophie first met Yemen, he was everything she had ever wanted. He showered her with attention, gave her the kind of love she thought she had been missing, and made her feel like the center of his world. His every word seemed calculated to make her feel special, to make her believe that she was his one true love. At first, it felt like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as Sophie would soon learn, were only written in books. In real life, even the most perfect stories had cracks in their foundations. As time passed, Yemen's affection turned cold. His distance was subtle at first, a few late nights at the office, an occasional missed phone call, but Sophie, ever the optimist, chalked it up to his demanding job. She made excuses for him, rationalizing his behavior. But as the months wore on, it became impossible to ignore the pattern. His once constant declarations of love were replaced by silence. His support and encouragement turned into criticism and gaslighting. It was then that Sophie realized something was wrong, but the truth was too painful to accept. Was Yemen really who he claimed to be, or had he been wearing a mask all along? The turning point came one evening when Sophie had planned a quiet dinner for the two of them. She had gone to great lengths to prepare Yemen's favorite meal, hoping to reignite the spark in their relationship. She waited, dressed in a way she knew he found irresistible, hoping for a night that would remind them of the early days of their marriage. But Yemen didn't show up until well past midnight, his eyes bloodshot and his behavior erratic. Sophie, hurt and frustrated, confronted him, asking where he had been. His response was cold, dismissive. He claimed he had been busy with work, something about a deal gone wrong. But Sophie knew better. This wasn't just about work. Yemen was pulling away, and she could feel it with every passing day. But what struck her the most that night was his reaction when she asked if he loved her. For the first time, Sophie saw the mask slip. His answer was chilling in its simplicity. "I did, once." Those words haunted Sophie for days. Did Yemen ever love her, or had it all been part of his plan? Lily had been Sophie's best friend since college. If Sophie had always been the picture of success, Lily was her grounding force, a free spirit at heart. Lily was someone who had always lived life on her terms. She had never sought out the approval of others or adhered to society's expectations. What people didn't know about Lily was that she had a deep sense of loyalty to those she loved, and Sophie was at the top of that list. Where Sophie's life had been one of calculated decisions and achievements, Lily's life had been more spontaneous. She worked as a boutique owner, running a small but successful shop in the heart of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but Lily loved it. She was proud of what she had built. More than that, she took joy in connecting with people, offering them not just products, but an experience, a bit of herself in everything she did. But Lily had always known there was something off about Sophie's marriage to Yemen. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. Yemen was charming, successful, and attentive. But over the years, Lily had seen the subtle changes in Sophie, the slow erosion of her friend's self-confidence and spark. Lily had tried to talk to Sophie about it, but Sophie always brushed it off, too afraid to confront the reality of her marriage. It wasn't until that fateful evening, when Sophie finally broke down, that Lily understood just how deep the wound went. Sophie had been living a lie for so long, and now everything was starting to unravel. Lily knew it was time to step in, but she also knew that helping Sophie wouldn't be easy. Yemen wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a master manipulator, and the stakes were higher than ever. Lily had seen Sophie through heartbreaks, challenges, and triumphs. But this was different. This was about saving her friend from a man who had stolen her sense of self, her trust, and her love. And yet, as the two women sat there together in the quiet of Sophie's living room, a plan began to form. A plan that would challenge everything they knew, one that would require not just courage, but something far deeper, revenge. The room was heavy with unspoken words, the air thick with tension. Sophie's hands trembled as she wiped away the last of her tears, still unable to fully grasp the enormity of what was unfolding. She had never imagined her life would come to this, sitting in her own home, with her closest friend, contemplating a betrayal so deep it felt almost unreal. How had it gotten to this point? That was the question that haunted her, echoing in her mind like a dull, relentless drum. The more Sophie thought about it, the more she realized how many small moments she had missed, moments when she could have seen the cracks forming in her marriage to Yemen. She had been so caught up in her pursuit of love, in believing that if she loved him enough, he would change, that she had failed to recognize the truth. Yemen wasn't capable of love, not in the way she needed, not in the way anyone truly deserved. But what Sophie had yet to realize was that what Yemen had done to her wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was a full-blown erosion of her identity. He had systematically chipped away at her sense of self, making her question her worth and eventually her ability to stand on her own. And that was where Lily came in. Lily had known Sophie long enough to understand the deep layers of her soul. She knew that underneath Sophie's external strength and poise was a woman who had been brought up to put others before herself, a woman who gave everything, even when she had nothing left to give. Sophie's downfall had been believing in Yemen's facade long after the truth had started to surface. Now, it was Lily's turn to help Sophie see herself again, not as the woman Yemen had molded her into, but as the fierce, independent woman she had once been. For Lily, this wasn't just about helping a friend. This was personal. Lily had spent too many years watching her best friend slip away, consumed by a man who never deserved her. When Sophie called her that night, sobbing in despair, Lily had known it was time. No more protecting Yemen, no more letting Sophie live in this suffocating web of lies. This would be their revenge. But revenge wasn't simple. It wasn't just about taking down Yemen. It was about Sophie reclaiming her power, reclaiming her voice. She had to find herself again before they could tear down the life Yemen had built on her misery. And to do that, they had to start from the inside out. They had to dismantle his control, brick by brick, before Sophie could finally stand tall. Sophie sat across from Lily, her gaze focused on the table, her mind racing. "Where do we even start?" Sophie's voice was quiet, tentative, as if she wasn't sure whether she was asking herself or Lily. Lily leaned in, her expression serious. "We start by breaking the cycle. You've been living under his thumb for far too long, Sophie. It's time to take back what's yours." Sophie swallowed, her throat tight. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Lily. I've been so focused on him, on trying to fix things, that I forgot about myself." Lily's eyes softened. "You're still there. You're just buried under years of lies. But we'll uncover you, step by step." Sophie nodded, her resolve starting to build. She could do this. She had to. They began to piece together their strategy, a careful plan to bring Yemen down and, more importantly, bring Sophie back to life. They had no illusions. This would be dangerous. It would test their limits, but the stakes were higher than ever. If they didn't act now, Sophie might lose everything. She might lose herself. The first step was to gain back control of Sophie's personal life. Yemen had isolated her from friends and family over the years, weaving lies and creating rifts that kept her from seeking help. It was a classic tactic: divide and conquer. If Sophie had no one to turn to, she was less likely to question his manipulation. But that was about to change. Lily had been discreet in her actions, contacting some of Sophie's closest family members and friends under the guise of catching up. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the seeds of re-establishing connections had been planted. Sophie's parents, who had once been distant due to Yemen's efforts to create a wedge between them, were slowly being brought back into her life. Sophie's sister too, who had been estranged for nearly a year, had been quietly reaching out to her, eager to reconnect to her. Eager to reconnect. Sophie knew she couldn't do this alone. Not now, not when she was so fragile. The more support she gathered around her, the more power she had to break free from Yemen's control. Lily had been the perfect partner in this mission. Her connections, her sharp mind, and her unyielding loyalty had made all the difference. Sophie's next move was a delicate one. She had to start playing Yemen's game on her own terms. For years, she had been the one to bend, to accommodate his moods and whims. She had walked on eggshells, unsure of how he would react to her every move. But that was about to change. Sophie had learned over time that Yemen thrived on unpredictability. The key to manipulating him was simple: create chaos on his terms, but with a twist. Sophie would begin to turn the tables. She would become the one who kept him guessing, and that's where Lily came in. Lily's role in this phase was pivotal. She would become the distraction, the catalyst that threw Yemen off balance. While Sophie subtly shifted the power dynamic in her marriage, Lily would be the one to create cracks in Yemen's carefully constructed world. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reasserting control, piece by piece. By the time they reached the third phase of their plan, Sophie had begun to feel the shift. She had started to speak her mind more openly to Yemen, questioning his behavior in ways she never had before. Yemen, taken aback by her newfound boldness, tried to brush her off. But the cracks were widening. One evening, as Sophie prepared for another tense dinner with Yemen, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't the scared woman she had been months ago. She had learned to embrace her power, her voice, and the trap was set. Lily had found an opening. Yemen had grown complacent, thinking he had everything under control. His overconfidence would be his downfall. Sophie was no longer his victim. She was the predator, and he had unwittingly walked straight into her grasp. Sophie's pulse quickened as she heard the sound of Yemen's car pulling into the driveway. Tonight would be the night. It would all come to a head. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. It's time. Sophie sat at the dining table, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass absent-mindedly. Her heart raced in her chest as she glanced at the clock, watching the hands tick by. The quiet hum of the evening, so different from the usual tension that filled their home, seemed almost too peaceful, but Sophie knew better. She knew what was coming. Yemen was coming home. The thought of seeing him again after all these months of planning made Sophie's stomach churn. She had no idea how he would react to her changes, to the fact that she was no longer the woman he had once controlled so easily. But tonight would be a turning point. She could feel it in her bones. She could hear the car now, pulling into the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as Yemen's sleek black sedan rolled to a stop. His arrival had always been accompanied by the same routine: a few moments of silence before the door opened, followed by his footsteps echoing across the floor. The pattern was familiar, almost comforting. But tonight, Sophie wasn't waiting for him with the usual anxiousness or dread. Tonight, she was ready. As the door swung open, Yemen entered, looking as polished as ever in his tailored suit. His presence always commanded attention, but Sophie couldn't bring herself to feel that reverence anymore. Not after everything he had done. Not after everything she had endured. "You're late," Sophie said, her voice steady, betraying none of the nerves that threatened to surface. Yemen's eyes narrowed as he kicked off his shoes and walked toward the dining room. He had never liked being confronted. It was always easier for him to control the situation, to dictate the narrative. But Sophie's cool demeanor unsettled him. She wasn't the same woman he had left this morning. "I had a meeting," he muttered, his voice clipped. "You know how it is." He sat down across from her, his eyes glancing at the food she had prepared. He didn't even seem to notice the effort, the tenderness she had put into making it special. Sophie met his gaze, her eyes locking with his for the first time in what felt like ages. "I know how it is. It's always the same, isn't it?" she asked softly, leaning forward slightly. "Work meetings, business. And when was the last time you really looked at me? When was the last time you cared? There was a beat of silence. Yemen's brow furrowed in confusion, his usual charm slipping as he tried to piece together what Sophie was saying. He had never heard her speak to him like this, not once in their entire marriage. "You're being irrational," he snapped, his tone defensive. "I'm doing this for us, for our future." Sophie laughed. Quietly at first, but the sound grew louder, more bitter. "Is that what you tell yourself? That everything you've done, everything you've put me through, is for us's? Because let me tell you something, Yemen, I've spent years trying to hold this relationship together, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner. And look where it's gotten me." She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look where it's gotten us." Yemen's gaze hardened. He had always prided himself on his control over Sophie, but something about her calm confidence, her willingness to stand up to him, felt like a betrayal. He had never known her to be this defiant, this unyielding. It unsettled him. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, standing up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm tired, Sophie. You're overreacting. I don't need this right now." But Sophie remained seated, unmoving. She wasn't done. She couldn't let him walk away from this conversation, not this time. "You never needed anything, Yemen. You've never needed me," she said, her voice rising with a clarity that surprised even herself. "I've been the one holding us together, convincing myself that this was love. But it wasn't, was it? It wasn't, was it? It was control. It was manipulation. You've been using me for years, and I've let you tear me apart, piece by piece." Her words hung in the air like a thick fog. Yemen froze, his back to her, his shoulders tense. He had always thought Sophie needed him. It was how he had kept her in line. But what if it was him who needed her more than he realized? For a moment, the silence stretched between them, suffocating. Then, with a quiet grunt, Yemen turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Sophie alone at the table. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but there was a strange sense of relief in her. She had said the words. She had taken the first step in freeing herself. But this was only the beginning. Sophie knew that. The game had only just started. While Sophie was battling the storm within her home, Lily was on the outside, quietly laying the groundwork for what would be their ultimate move. She had always been the strategist, the one who thought 3 steps ahead, and she knew how dangerous Yemen could be when cornered. It was why she had been working carefully to isolate him from his own network, eroding the trust he had built with others. Lily's plan was subtle but effective. She started reaching out to Yemen's business associates, slipping in casual conversations where she could subtly plant seeds of doubt. She made sure to drop hints about Sophie's growing independence, how she was starting to speak her mind more, how she wasn't the same woman Yemen had married. And, as Lily suspected, Yemen's pride and arrogance wouldn't allow him to ignore the whispers. He began to notice the shift in the air, the undercurrent of change that was slowly but surely shaking the foundation of his carefully crafted empire. The power dynamics were shifting, and Yemen didn't know how to stop it. But Lily wasn't done. She had another card to play, the one Sophie was still unaware of. While Sophie was focused on her marriage, Lily had been quietly monitoring Yemen's personal finances, and what she found was staggering. Yemen had been embezzling money from his company, using their joint accounts to cover his tracks. It was illegal, dangerous, and it was the perfect leverage. Lily knew that Sophie would never go this route willingly. She was too good-hearted to use a man's criminal actions against him. But Lily wasn't bound by the same moral code. She wasn't about to let Yemen walk away unscathed, especially not after everything he had put Sophie through. The next step in their plan was risky, but it had to be done. It was time to take Yemen's empire down piece by piece and show him exactly what it felt like to lose everything. Sophie stood in front of the mirror again, the reflection staring back at her, feeling more foreign than ever. She was no longer just the woman who had been manipulated and controlled. She was someone different now, someone stronger, someone who had finally realized her worth. But she wasn't done, not yet. Tonight was the night when everything would come to light. Tonight, Sophie would take control of her future once and for all. And she would have to do it in a way that no one, not even Yemen, could ever deny. As she walked down the stairs to meet him, she felt an unexpected surge of power. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The final move was upon them, and Sophie was ready. The sound of Sophie's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Each step she took seemed louder than the last, the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a 1,000-pound anchor. She had been through so much that she had nearly lost herself in Yemen's web. But now, standing at the threshold of something new, something terrifying, Sophie wasn't afraid anymore. Tonight was the night. The plan was in motion, and the pieces were falling into place. It felt like a symphony building to its climax, each note carefully crafted, each move strategically planned. But Sophie knew that no matter how carefully they had plotted it, there was no turning back now. Once she crossed that line, everything would change. She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward the living room where Yemen sat, his back to her as he fiddled with his phone, absorbed in the screen. His presence still had the ability to make her feel small, but tonight it was different. Tonight, he wasn't the powerful figure he thought he was. Tonight, Sophie had the power. Yemen didn't even acknowledge her presence as she entered the room, but she didn't care. He didn't need to know that Sophie had already decided. She had already made her choice, and the man sitting in front of her, completely unaware of what was coming, would be the last person to stand in her way. Sophie stood still, her back straight, her eyes never leaving his form. She had a plan, but it didn't rely on grand gestures or declarations. It relied on something deeper, something more personal. "Yemen," Sophie said, her voice firm yet calm. Yemen didn't respond. His fingers tapped away on his phone, oblivious to the shift in the air. "I've had enough," Sophie continued, her tone unyielding. "I'm done." Finally, Yemen looked up, his brows furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" His voice was dismissive, as though he didn't believe for a second that Sophie could stand up to him. "I'm talking about this, Yemen, about everything." Sophie's eyes were unwavering. She could feel the weight of every word she spoke, each syllable loaded with meaning. "You've used me, manipulated me, and twisted everything we've built. I was never your partner. I was just your tool, and I won't be that anymore." Yemen's face contorted with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're overreacting. What's gotten into you?" Sophie took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that raged inside her. She was no longer the woman who had been afraid of his anger, of his rage. She had faced it too many times before. This was different. She was no longer just reacting. She was taking action. "I'm not overreacting," she said, stepping closer to him, her voice quieter now, but still piercing. "I'm leaving." Yemen laughed, but it was a hollow, disbelieving sound. "Leaving? Where are you going, Sophie? Do you really think you can just walk away from everything we've built? You're nothing without me." Sophie's heart didn't race this time. She had heard it all before, and she wasn't afraid anymore. She had everything she needed. "I'm not nothing," she said, standing tall, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm not your possession, and I won't let you control me any longer." Yemen rose from the couch, his fists clenched at his sides. "You will regret this," he spat, his eyes burning with fury. "Make sure of it!" But Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't back down. "Do your worst, Yemen," she said, her voice cold, "because it won't work anymore." Meanwhile, across town, Lily was in the final stages of executing her own part of the plan. She had known this day was coming, and she had been preparing for it from the moment Sophie had confided in her. The destruction of Yemen's empire wasn't just about emotional manipulation or personal confrontation. It was about taking away everything he had built. Lily had already begun to reach out to Yemen's business associates, but now she was moving into the more dangerous territory, his finances. The deeper Lily had dug, the more she uncovered. Yemen wasn't just emotionally manipulating Sophie. He was stealing from everyone around him. His empire was built on lies, deceit, and now Lily had the evidence to bring it all crashing down. She sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her face as she pored over the financial records she had managed to obtain. Every transaction, every hidden account. Lily had it all. But what really made her blood run cold was the discovery of Yemen's offshore accounts, where millions of dollars had been siphoned off without Sophie's knowledge. Lily's hands trembled as she opened the encrypted email from one of her most trusted informants. The subject line was clear: Yemen Khalid, illegal transactions revealed. There it was, the final piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about Sophie's marriage anymore. This was about taking down the very foundation of Yemen's power. Lily had already contacted a few journalists, and tonight she would send them everything. She had proof of Yemen's financial crimes, proof that could send him to prison for a very long time. But Lily wasn't doing this for the sake of justice alone. She was doing it to destroy Yemen's ability to manipulate Sophie, to make him pay for everything he had taken from them. Back in the house, Sophie was still facing Yemen, who was fuming in front of her. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white, but Sophie wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't afraid of what he could do, or what he might say. The man who had once held so much power over her now seemed like a shadow of the person she had once feared. "You think you're going to just walk away from me?" Yemen spat. "You think you can control me like you've been doing all these years?" Sophie's lips curled into a faint smile. "No, Yemen. I don't need to control you. You've already done that yourself. I'm walking away because I finally realized I don't need you. I never did." For a long moment there was silence between them. Then Yemen took a step towards Sophie, his anger giving way to desperation. "You'll regret this," he repeated, his voice shaking. "You'll regret leaving me. I will destroy you." But Sophie didn't waver. "You've already tried, Yemen." She turned and began walking toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. Behind her, she could hear Yemen's voice rising, but it didn't matter anymore. It was all empty threats. Nothing he said could reach her now. As she stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like a blanket, and Sophie felt the weight of her decision lift. She was free. But Sophie knew this wasn't over. Yemen wouldn't go down quietly. She had to keep moving, keep fighting. She wasn't safe yet. As she made her way to her car, Sophie's phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. "It's all set. He's going down. Get ready." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the end of Yemen's reign. And as Sophie drove into the night, the horizon before her felt like an open road. She wasn't running away anymore. She was moving forward. And nothing could stop her now. Sophie's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she sped down the empty streets, the cool air rushing in through the cracks in the window. Her mind was racing, replaying the scene with Yemen over and over in her head. She had finally spoken the truth. She had told him she was leaving, but was it enough? Was it truly over? Her phone buzzed again, and this time the message was from an unknown number. She hesitated before reading it, her stomach knotting with suspicion. "You can't hide from me, Sophie. I always find out where you are. You're making a huge mistake." Sophie's heart sank, her body instantly tense. It was Yemen, of course. His words felt like a slap in the face, a desperate attempt to reassert his control over her. He was trying to make her doubt herself, to pull her back into his world of manipulation and fear. But she wouldn't let him. With a deep breath, Sophie pressed the phone's screen to her ear and dialed Lily's number. She needed to hear her voice, to remind herself that she wasn't alone in this. "Lily." Sophie's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but there was no mistaking the determination beneath it. "I'm here," Lily replied, her voice strong. "What's going on?" "He just sent me a message," Sophie said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "He's threatening me again. He says I can't hide from him." Lily's response was immediate. "Don't listen to him. He's just trying to scare you. We're almost there, Sophie. He's on his last legs." Sophie took another steadying breath. "I know, but it doesn't feel like it's over. He's always been able to find a way to manipulate me. I can't shake the feeling that he's going to do something drastic." "Listen to me," Lily said firmly, her tone unrelenting. "You've already done the hardest part. You're not alone in this anymore. I've got the evidence, and once I release it to the press, it's over for him. He won't be able to control anyone ever again." Sophie took comfort in Lily's confidence, the reminder of the work they had done together. Lily had already gathered all the financial documents, the hidden accounts, the wire transfers, every piece of damning evidence that would ruin Yemen's empire. It was all carefully packaged, ready to be sent to investigative reporters who were eager to tear apart the truth behind Yemen's empire of lies. But there was still one final piece of the puzzle left to place. Back in her apartment, Lily stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the mouse. The files she had compiled sat in front of her, ready to be uploaded to the journalists who would expose Yemen's embezzlement and his network of deceit. But there was something about this final move that made her hesitate. The truth was, Lily had done her homework. She had meticulously connected every dot between Yemen's personal dealings and the company he ran, tracing illegal transactions and shady business practices all the way to his most trusted associates. The evidence was airtight. Once it went public, Yemen would be finished, financially ruined, his career in shambles. But there was something else Lily had found, something she wasn't sure Sophie knew. Yemen had been siphoning money not just from his business accounts, but from their shared assets, the money Sophie had trusted him with, believing in the lie that their life together was built on mutual respect. There were accounts Sophie didn't know about, investments he had hidden from her. The betrayal ran deeper than Sophie had realized. Lily knew this would hurt Sophie. It would shake her to her core to learn that Yemen had been stealing from her all these years, building his wealth on her trust. Sophie had been naive, but it wasn't her fault. Yemen had orchestrated it so expertly that even the most discerning eye would miss it. But Lily wasn't about to let that stop her. She couldn't, not after everything Yemen had done. He had to pay for every single lie, every ounce of manipulation. The press was about to get the scoop of a lifetime. With one final click, Lily sent the files to the journalists, watching as they disappeared into the ether, no longer hers to control. All she could do now was wait. Back in the car, Sophie turned the corner and saw the familiar silhouette of her home rising against the dark sky. The last few hours had been a blur of emotions, adrenaline, and uncertainty, but she was here now, and she couldn't back down. She parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out, her legs shaking beneath her. The night felt different, darker, more ominous, but also liberating in a way she couldn't fully describe. It felt like she was standing at the edge of something huge, about to jump into the unknown. As she walked toward the front door, she saw the shadow of Yemen's car parked in the driveway, its engine still warm. He was waiting for her, and Sophie knew he wouldn't let her go without a fight. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and there he was. Yemen stood in the foyer, his back to her, his posture stiff, almost military in its rigidity. He had been waiting for her. "Where do you think you're going?" Yemen's voice was low, menacing, but there was a quiver in it, a sign that he knew the tide was turning. Sophie stood her ground, the weight of his presence still heavy in the air. "I'm done, Yemen. I'm leaving." Yemen turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk away from all this? You think you can just leave me and take everything with you? You're wrong. I will destroy you before I let you leave." Sophie's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to back down. "You've already tried to destroy me, Yemen." Yemen stepped forward, his eyes flashing with fury.
Nothing without me. Nothing.
Sophie didn't flinch. "I've already told you, I'm not nothing, and I'm not yours to control anymore." There was a moment of stillness. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Then Sophie felt the phone in her pocket buzz once again. She pulled it out, her thumbs scrolling over the message. It was from Lily. "It's live. The articles are out. He's finished." Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she looked at Yemen, who was watching her closely, his face tight with rage. The weight of the moment hit her hard, but Sophie didn't flinch. She smiled. "It's over, Yemen," she said, her voice calm and resolute. The next few hours were a blur of police calls, journalists flooding the house, and the screeching of tires as Yemen tried desperately to salvage his reputation. But it was all in vain. The truth was out. The world now knew who Yemen Khalid really was. A fraud, a criminal, a man who had built his empire on lies, manipulation, and the stolen trust of those closest to him. Sophie stood at the window, watching as the chaos unfolded before her eyes. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She had taken back her life. She was free. The hours after the articles went live felt like a strange blur of relief, adrenaline and disbelief. Sophie had watched as her life, her marriage, her entire existence had been twisted and manipulated into something unrecognizable. Yet, in the silence of her home, with the world unraveling around her, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Yemen's empire was crumbling before her eyes. His personal life had been laid bare, his illicit financial dealings exposed to the public, and now the weight of his deception was crashing down like a ton of bricks. Sophie hadn't even realized how deeply Yemen's lies had buried themselves into her soul until she saw the truth spread across the news. The fear she had carried for so long started to melt away. But there was still work to be done. Sophie sat down at her desk, her fingers brushing over the papers Lily had sent her. It was hard to believe it was finally happening. The end of Yemen's reign. But there was something else in those documents. The stolen assets, the offshore accounts, the money siphoned from her own accounts without her knowledge. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Her heart pounded in her chest. How had she not seen it before? How had she allowed herself to become so blinded by Yemen's manipulations? Sophie closed her eyes, forcing herself to take a deep breath. There would be time to process all of it later. For now, she had to focus. The next step was figuring out what came next for her. She had made the decision to leave Yemen, but now that the world knew the truth, Sophie had to carve out a new path. A life without him, without the shadows of the man who had controlled her for so long. She picked up her phone and sent a quick text to Lily. "We did it! It's all over!" Seconds later, her phone buzzed with a response. "We're not done yet. This is just the beginning." Sophie smiled to herself, a sense of gratitude filling her chest. Lily had been there for her every step of the way, from the first moments of self-doubt to the final click of the send button that had sent Yemen's world into a tailspin. As she prepared to leave her home, her once shared home with Yemen, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sophie hesitated for only a moment before she stood up, her feet heavy against the floor as she moved toward the door. She knew who it was. He wasn't done yet. She opened the door, and there stood Yemen, his face drawn and haggard, his expensive suit now disheveled, the illusion of his polished, untouchable persona shattered. He looked almost unrecognizable, a man at war with the truth. His eyes were wild, his breath quick, and the anger in his posture was palpable. "You think you've won, don't you?" Yemen's voice was thick with fury, but there was a tremor in it, something Sophie had never heard before. Sophie stood her ground, arms crossed in front of her, the weight of his presence no longer affecting her the way it once did. "You lost the moment you decided to lie to me," she replied quietly, her voice steady but firm. "You lost the moment you started using me as a pawn in your game." Yemen's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring as he stepped forward. "You think this is over?" he spat. "I'll destroy you, Sophie. I'll make sure you never walk away from this." Sophie's heart fluttered, but this time it wasn't fear, it was resolve. She had already walked away. She had already taken her life back. The man in front of her no longer had control over her. "You're already destroyed, Yemen," she said, her voice cold and cutting. "Everything you've built is built on lies. You can't control me anymore. You never could." His face twisted with rage, but Sophie didn't flinch. She had seen his anger before, and she wasn't afraid of it anymore. Not now that she knew the truth. Not now that she understood what real power was. It wasn't in manipulating others. It was in standing up for yourself, in having the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Yemen reached out, his hand moving as though he meant to grab her. But Sophie stepped back, out of reach. She wasn't going to let him touch her. Not now, not ever again. "I'm done," she said, her voice softer now, but no less strong. "You're on your own. I'll never let you control me again." She closed the door in his face, the sound of it slamming reverberating in her chest. It was the final act of severing the bond that had once kept her locked in a cage. The cage had been broken, and she was free. The next few days were a blur of media attention, legal paperwork and phone calls. The press descended on Yemen's office, his friends and business partners distanced themselves from him, and his reputation, once polished and untouchable, began to unravel. His arrest was inevitable. There was no escaping the truth. The evidence was irrefutable, and it didn't take long before Yemen was taken into custody. Sophie, meanwhile, began the arduous process of rebuilding. She had already started reaching out to her family, re-establishing the relationships that had been strained by Yemen's manipulations. She made a call to her parents, a conversation she had been avoiding for years, and the moment they spoke, Sophie felt the floodgates open. Tears of relief, of grief, of everything she had held in for so long, poured out in that conversation. But it wasn't just grief. It was a return to the woman she had once been, the woman she was reclaiming. With Lily's help, Sophie began to reclaim her life piece by piece. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of everything she had been through felt suffocating. But Lily was there, offering her unwavering support, reminding Sophie of her strength. They started the process of healing together. Sophie hired a lawyer, filed for the divorce, and officially severed all ties with Yemen. The legal battles would take time, but Sophie had made it clear. She wasn't looking back. She was moving forward. Months passed. The media frenzy over Yemen's arrest eventually died down, and Sophie was left to pick up the pieces of her life. But each day, she felt stronger. She began volunteering at a local charity, something she had always wanted to do, but had never had the courage for while she was married to Yemen. She rediscovered her love of writing, something that had long been buried beneath the weight of her marriage. Sophie had not only survived her marriage to Yemen, she had emerged from it stronger, more resilient, and more herself than she had ever been. One evening, as she sat on the balcony of her new apartment, sipping a glass of wine and looking out over the city skyline, Sophie received a message from Lily. "I'm proud of you, Sophie. You did it, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Sophie smiled as she typed her reply. "I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for never giving up on me." As she hit send, Sophie realized that she wasn't just healing from her past. She was creating a new future, and it was a future that was entirely her own. Sophie, once a woman trapped in a cycle of control and emotional manipulation, had emerged stronger. Though the scars of Yemen's deception would never fully fade, she had reclaimed her independence. She learned that real power wasn't in wealth or status, but in self-awareness, courage, and the ability to walk away from what no longer served her. Lily, the strategist behind Yemen's downfall, had also changed. She had dedicated herself to protecting Sophie, but in the process, she uncovered a strength she didn't know she had. The experience had reshaped her, making her realize the depths to which people could deceive, and the importance of standing by the truth. Yemen, once a man who controlled everything, had lost it all in a matter of hours. The world he had constructed so meticulously crumbled beneath him. The people he once manipulated had banded together, exposing his lies for all to see. In the end, he wasn't the mastermind he believed himself to be. He was just another man who thought he was untouchable until the truth caught up with him. The media storm that followed Yemen's fall was ruthless, dissecting every detail of his fraudulent empire. Business partners distanced themselves, former allies turned against him, and legal investigations ensured that he would never regain his status. But for Sophie, the battle was no longer about Yemen. She had spent years living in someone else's shadow. Now, for the first time in a long time, she was free. No more lies, no more manipulations, no more waking up in fear of what Yemen might say or do. She had walked through the fire, and she had survived. 1 year later, she sat at a cafe in a new city, far from the life she once knew. The sun was setting in shades of orange and gold, casting a warm glow over the streets. She had started a new job, built new friendships, and rediscovered herself in ways she never thought possible. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "We did it. He's gone, and we're still here." Sophie smiled, staring at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Yes, we are." With that, she put her phone away and walked into the evening, knowing that for the first time in her life, her future was truly her own. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Next time, we'll uncover another case where betrayal, secrets, and unimaginable decisions changed lives forever.